I mean, the concept of domain is such a beneficial thing to have awareness of. If you can apply this in as many aspects of your day to day as possible, I think it's beneficial. Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self. Good morning, Dawson. How are you today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I don't know. Maybe welcome everyone to the Do You Feel Heard podcast. This morning Derek is not going to make it, and so it's just the two of us. We talked about a couple of potential topics today, one of which being domain, um, and kind of how the concept of domain and how we apply that on multiple different aspects of our lives. So, yeah, you said you had questions around domain. Would you like, maybe I'll start with like an explanation of domain.
Yeah, I feel like
So,
an
go
intro
ahead.
would be good, and then. Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking a question, but yeah, I feel like starting with an intro would be good, and then we can get into some of the things that kind of can be like a gray area.
Sweet. So, domain, as I understand it, so domain is a term that I first found from Dr. Betty Martin, who wrote The Art of Giving and Receiving, developed The Wheel of Consent, The 3 Minute Game, a lot of things that I introduce to my clients as well as teach and do workshops on and things along those lines. And so, domain, the idea of domain is that each one of us, if you imagine a circle, each one of us has this circle. And inside of this circle is all of the things that you have a right to and that you have a responsibility for. And so, some examples are your feelings. You have a right to feel whatever you feel, and you also have a responsibility to navigate those feelings, manage those feelings. Your body, you have a right to your body, and you also have a responsibility to care for your body and to use your body in responsible ways. Other things, desires. I'm trying to think of what else. There was another one that came up recently that was a really good one in there.
I think
But
thoughts, feelings, health, and body are the ones I can think of.
your beliefs, I think, are a good
Oh
one in
yeah,
there too. I
yeah.
think that's what it was. Oh, your perception. That's what we were talking about. So, um, the person that's helping me write the book that is being written, we were talking about how ultimately you get to control how you perceive your reality. No one
Mhm.
else gets to decide that for you. Now, there are actively all sorts of different forces that are trying to alter the way that you perceive your reality, right? The
Mhm.
media is a big one, both the news as well as like movies and music. Um, and then you've got parents, and then you've got teachers, and then there's so many different advertising agencies. They're all trying to convince you that the world is a certain way, and they all have
Right.
their reasons for doing so. But ultimately, at the end of the day, how you choose to perceive your experience is in your domain. You have a right to perceive it however you want, but you also have a responsibility to perceive your reality in a responsible way.
Mhm.
Um, and so anyway, so that's domain, and um, surrounding that circle is the boundary. Um, this terminology is again kind of confusing because people say boundaries for different things. Well, this is a boundary. Well, and so the terminology can get kind of fuzzy, but I like the frame that Betty Martin puts it in, which is that there is a boundary that protects your domain, that is protecting all of the things that you have a right to and a responsibility for. And when someone reaches in and tries to touch your domain or uh, impact or change your domain, you respond, or that boundary activates a response that is rooted in the emotion of anger.
Mhm.
Anger being a spectrum where maybe it's a 5 out of 100, and so it's like a don't do that. I don't really want to do that. And then there's a 50 where you're a little more, all right, stop, I'm not okay with that. And then all the way up to 100.
Right.
um, and so that is the root a motion that's protecting all of those things that are inside of your domain. And then between your circle and my circle, all the space in between is filled with our limits, what we are and aren't available for. And these things will change given based on any number of circumstances, the time of day, who's making the request, what did you experience that day, how are you feeling. Ultimately your limits are, yeah, what you're available for. Some people might consider that boundaries. That's how we use it more commonly in our language, is no, that's a boundary for me, but that boundary might not be permanent, whereas the boundary protecting your domain is permanent. That will always be there to protect it. And so your limits or your availabilities will change given a number of different circumstances. So that would be my brief explanation of what domain is, and a few of the things that are inside of all of our individual domains.
Yeah, that was great. Great explanation, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good concept too. Like it really helps you establish like what what belongs to you. You know, like I think it's a really good practice. Do you want to maybe like talk about a couple examples? Like maybe we can each give a couple examples of times where like domain has come into play. Do you want to do that?
Certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So I was thinking about an example of like sometimes at work, there'll be like something that comes up, and one of my coworkers will like they'll be mad about a decision that a manager has made or something, and they want me to feel that too. Like if they're feeling that anger, like they're entitled to that anger. That's how they feel about it, right? That's in their domain, and they're entitled to feel that way. But they also want me almost to feel that anger too. But like it might not affect me the same way. Like I might not care. Like the same thing that matters to them might not matter to me. So, and in a way, they're kind of reaching into my domain, trying to change how I feel about the situation. When really we just start perceiving it differently. You talked about perception, which I think is a really good one to add into domain, a super important one to add into domain, because how you perceive a situation could be vastly different to how someone else does. And so, like in that situation, my perception of it is that it really just doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. So, to me, I'm not feeling angry about it, but you do you, like they can be mad about it if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example of someone trying to reach into your domain and change how you feel about something. That's similar to an example that I was giving of, like, let's say I want to plant fruit trees in the front yard. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I might spend some time explaining to my partner all the reasons why it'd be great for us to have fruit trees so that they want fruit trees. So
Mm-hmm.
now I can get those fruit trees, which is probably the most, innocent way of reaching into someone's domain, but you're still reaching into their domain. And the other way of approaching that could have been, hey, I want fruit trees in the front yard. How do you feel about having fruit trees in the front yard? That's embodying consent. That's embodying, like, really honoring that other person's domain as it is, regardless of how I feel about fruit trees. How do they feel about fruit trees? And oftentimes in our communication, in our conversations, we will kind of prime that person. We'll get them ready to answer the question, and we'll do it with how we feel about something, or
Mm-hmm.
ultimately how we want them to feel about something. We'll paint something in a certain light and then ask them the question. Don't you
Right.
think fruit trees are amazing? Gosh, they just give you food and it's delicious. I was thinking about fruit trees in the front yard. Like, what do you think about having fruit trees in the front yard? Rather than just being honest and speaking your honest truth from your domain. And so, yeah, very similar, trying to get them to want something so I don't have to admit that I want something.
Yeah, that's a good example. Like sometimes I catch myself doing that too. Like there'll be like I'm not super into politics, but sometimes there'll be like a political thing coming up, and I'll give my whole take on it. I'll give a whole spiel about it, and then I'll be like, "But what do you think?" Like after I just stated like all these things of kind of shifting it one way, and it's like that's not really I'm always trying to impact how they feel because you know I feel like humans we want the people around us in a way to like agree with us, like
Hmm.
it's obviously good for us to all have different thoughts, but like in a way, it's like if around me agrees with me, it must mean I'm right. So like
Right.
kind of trying to domain kind of is a good reminder of like everyone can feel how they want. They don't have to all feel the same. So yeah.
Yeah, that validation is definitely a human. I don't know if it's a need, but it's certainly something that we want. But we're
Yeah,
also very tribal. We're very communal, and so I mean, for us to agree on something creates some level of connection between us.
yeah,
We share this in common, a bond that we have. And so I think it's natural to want as much of that kind of a bond as you can get. What's funny is you're talking about political conversations, and what I noticed as you're describing what you did in that scenario of like talking about how you feel about something politically and then asking for their opinion. I find that as soon as, like, if it goes that direction, if somebody leads with what they think and then asks me, I'm far more like diplomatic. I'm far more like talking like a politician, not really saying anything, but like, well, everybody has their own
hmm
opinions, and politics aren't really what they, I'm more of like, yeah, just diplomatic about how I'm responding to it, not really giving a stance because you've already given your stance.
right.
And so most of the time I'm just going to not go into it. But also, to be fair, I don't have a lot of political opinions.
hmm
I mean, the political sphere is entertainment. It is a show that is being put on, and so like I'm as disinterested to discuss politics with people as I am to discuss the Kardashians. I don't really see a difference in the two, except one has seemingly greater implications, but there's an illusion that anything you think or say makes any impact in what is happening behind those scenes. And I just don't personally like to waste time putting energy into things I have no control over whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. And when they do kind of prime you for that conversation and then ask you, it's almost like, do I feel like getting into an argument right now? Like if
Exactly.
I actually don't
Exactly.
agree, it's like almost like picking my battles. And almost every
Mhm.
time I do what you said, I'm always like, yeah, I don't feel strongly one way or the other. A lot of the times I don't, but even if I do, and I know they feel strongly one way, it's like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of arguing about this? Like you said, it's not going to
Right.
really solve anything. Our conversation isn't going to change the political landscape of the world. So it's like, just let it go.
And like this thing of identity politics, which is what we have really since we've been born, either of us, our entire lifetimes, people have been like identifying and attaching themselves to their political view
Oh
as if
yeah,
it's a part of them. And so there is no chance of changing their mind through conversation. That's not going to happen. They have to either want to change or they will discover something about whatever their identity politics happens to be and have that realization on their own, that aha moment. But you're not going to extrinsically motivate somebody to
yeah,
change their political, identity,
yeah,
if they have a political identity. And so, yeah, it's either do I argue with this person or do I just let them have their opinion and kind of politely move that conversation in a different direction? And I also lean the other way. It's a little bit of conflict avoidance, but I think it's probably the only healthy version of conflict avoidance that I would recommend people do is don't start an argument or a conflict where it's not productive. It's not
yeah,
going to lead to something beneficial for either of you.
yeah. There's not really even an importance. Like even if the conversation goes as good as it possibly could for you, and you do change that mind, it's like, okay, now what? Like nothing really changes, So
Right.
I agree. Yeah, it's avoidant, but it's yeah, it makes sense to do it in that case.
For
Um,
sure.
and then I wanted to give another example too of a time where I've like caught myself. This is a time in my life where I really wish I would have known about domain. Like I had a friend who I'm not going to get like super specific, but I
Tell
had a
me his
friend.
date of birth and his address and his social security number.
All right, I'll put that in the comments. But I had a friend who like we perceived the world and like our lives very differently, and I wanted this person to desire more for themselves. Like I
Mhm.
wanted them to, I guess, make what I would consider better decisions. I can't say that I was right or that better is like, what I say is better is actually better because, maybe it's not. But like I wanted them to like make better like financial decisions and do things that would help their situation. And I found it like taking up a lot of my headspace was like trying to almost fix the way this person thought, you know? And then I realized I'm like, I'm making, like, I am reaching so far into this person's domain and making it like, I'm trying to literally enter their domain and be in it and try to fix all the things when really, like, I can't do that. Like, I can't, uh, because I found I was very unsuccessful. Like, I wasn't able to actually change, you know, their mind about anything. And eventually I realized, like, what am I doing here? Like, I can't change how they think and how they feel. Like, I can give my input, but it's not helping, and if anything, it's creating more of a divide. So that's when I kind of like, without knowing the term domain, I kind of like realized like, okay, like this person is entitled to their, you know, like their view of their life and what they want to do, and it's just, you know, this is what it is, and I have to focus on my domain and what I'm responsible for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the concept of domain is such a beneficial thing to have awareness of. Like, if you can apply this in as many aspects of your day to day as possible, I think it's beneficial. That reminded me of this. I think we might have talked about this on either a podcast you and I did, or a different one of these Do You Feel Heard podcasts. But there was this. I listened to a podcast where this guy was talking about how, in his opinion, like or not in his opinion, but one of his like um words, one of his like prerequisites, I guess, one of his prerequisites before deciding whether or not to date someone is to look at them and ask himself honestly, if nothing about this person changed at all, if they never changed anything and they were exactly who they were for the rest of their lives, could you be content? And if you can't, then that's not a relationship that you should engage in, because it is hinging on the success is hinging on them changing.
Right.
And that's not fair to that person to go into a relationship with them hoping that they'll change things about themselves. That maybe, I mean, unless you have a conversation, I guess that would be okay. But even still, I think it would be best not to do that, because, like, change isn't a requirement. Some people don't change. Some
Hmm.
people, or they do change, but they don't change everything, right? They keep some things about themselves. And I think it is a disservice to everybody involved if you're in that relationship and there's a part of you that's like waiting for them or wanting them to change, pushing them to change in any degree. And so extrapolating that outward to even like platonic friendships, I think it's the same thing
Hmm.
of like, oh, this person, drinks and smokes a lot. I want to be friends with them, but I also want them to stop doing those things.
Right.
And so I'm going to hang out with them. We're going to build a bond and a relationship, all the while I'm ultimately reaching into their domain over time in different ways, trying to get them to want to do something differently than they're doing. And yeah, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's honoring or embodying consent.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like they're trying to mold the person into their vision of what they want their partner to be, and it's like,
Hmm.
well, that's like that's very much violating their domain. Like, you can't change, like, you can't change like what they want, and like only they can do that, you know.
Right.
So yeah, I completely agree. I think that's yeah, it's a tough one because like everyone in like in a relationship, of course, there's probably some things that they like, you know, wished were different or whatever, but you don't have control over what changes and what doesn't change. So yeah, it makes sense. So the part about domain that I think sometimes it can be like a gray area, um, is when in a relationship. Well, actually, let me start with this one. There's like two of them, but with this one. So for example, I know someone who is like a loved one of mine, and they did some of the decisions that they make in regards to their health. I'll just say it's not serving them.
Hmm.
And as their loved one, I have the desire to, you know, I guess I would say change them, change their want to be in better health and like their view of their health. And I'd be lying if I said I don't want them to change and I don't want them to make like healthier decisions because I love them. According to domain, I would be reaching into their domain by trying to change that. But I feel like it's kind of a gray area because I don't know, like it's their health and like I want them to be better off. So I don't know, like what do you think about that? Like what do you think about it? Like is it ever I guess like is it ever okay to reach into someone's domain? But at the other argument would be like their desires for what they want their health to be is up to them. So who am
Right.
I to say what it should be? It's tough.
Yeah, man. I would say that, yeah, this is a fun exercise. So, my question, I'll send the question back to you and ask you, how could you communicate your truth to them while embodying consent?
mm, I mean, I could ask them like I could ask them if they're like happy with their current like health, I guess, and start there. And then if they say no, like maybe ask them questions about like if they're available to hear other options or hear my take or maybe some things that I think might help. I could do that. As I still feel like in a way I'm kind of trying to lead that person into like my desire for them to be healthier, but I could do it that way. Like at least in that way, there's consent. You know what I'm asking?
Right. Yeah, I think that would be the best approach. I don't think that you're reaching into someone's domain if you've gotten consent from them to have the conversation. I think reaching into the domain happens when you haven't gotten consent and you're just trying to influence or manipulate or alter what's in their domain. I think that's when you're reaching in. In this example, if you first came to them and like I like the "Are you available?" but I would have used it sooner. The "Are you available to talk about your relationship with food or
Mm-hmm.
health, whatever the topic is?" But first, make sure they're even available to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have deep rooted trauma, whether it's around food or their image of their body, things like that. I mean, those are common things that people have traumas with.
Mm-hmm.
Again, everything's a spectrum, right? And so a range of trauma, big T, little T, somewhere in the middle, right? Um, but everyone has, I think, a lot of people. I don't like using the everyone's. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people have those. It's common, at least that I see in my work, and so it would be best to get consent in each aspect of that conversation. Are you available to talk about it at all? Great. And then ask your questions before priming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect that we just talked about that. Don't prime them with, well, because I see you doing this and I think that don't start with any of that. If you genuinely want to understand how they feel before you move into that conversation, then do that. Ask the question. Ask as many questions as they're available to answer. And then, I mean, regardless of how, whether they do or they don't like their you know, relationship with food or, they're not happy with their health, it doesn't really matter whether or not how they feel about that because all that's still in their domain. So how they feel is how they feel. I think once you fully understand their relationship and how they feel, then another question comes in, another um, request for consent of, are you available to hear my thoughts, my observations, my feelings, things that I know that I maybe think could be helpful for you to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, and then see if they're available for that. And if they are, then you're like, they've given consent to hear what you have to say, and now you're not speaking to to try to change their domain. You're speaking from your domain. You're speaking your truth. I
Mm-hmm.
feel this way. This is my truth about what I see, how I feel, and be honest and vulnerable. Maybe it does look like I care about you so much and it hurts me to see you do things that I perceive to be damaging. That is
Mhm.
your truth. That's how you feel, and that's valid. They haven't done anything wrong. They don't need to do anything differently than they're doing because of how you feel.
Right.
You're just speaking your truth. And so I think that's where where I would draw that line is, are you speaking your truth from your domain, or are you trying to change their domain? Are you trying to get them to do something differently? And most importantly, do you have consent on all sides of this from the other person before you're offering this information to them?
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it, and that kind of changes, like, the way I view it. Because yeah, like you said, once you have consent, you're no longer invading or
Right.
doing. You're not breaching or reaching in. And then once you have it, that's a good point too. To like speak from your domain, just speak your truth about the situation. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of uh, mostly answers the other like gray area I was talking about, because that's a good point about it's like the boundary aspect. Like once the person is allowing you in, you're not breaching anything. So yeah, that's a good point.
Cool. Great question, man. Um, yeah, I think we covered that really well. Um, the other thing that came up recently in the conversation of domain is, if our feelings are in our domain, that means we have a right to them and we have a responsibility for them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they're ours, which means we are in control to some degree of how we, and well, let me add also the perception of reality, right? Since we get to perceive our reality, we also get to perceive how things are happening to us, which will impact how we feel about things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, with those two things in mind, there's a phrase that I really don't like because I don't agree with it, and I want to brainstorm this with you because this came up again in the session with the person that's writing my book with me, and they're having some hangups around this phrase, and so I want to pull it apart together.
Okay.
So I communicated to her that I believed that no one can make you feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a common thing that I hear of like, well, you made me feel this, or, you know, you make me feel blah. And I personally don't agree with that language. I don't think that that's a thing. I don't think you can make me feel anything.
Yep.
You can say things and I can have feelings about the things that you say, but ultimately how I feel about what you say is going to be skewed or impacted by my perception of the situation and the reality. So for instance, you could try to make me feel angry and you could say all sorts of mean things to me that are hurtful, but if I'm perceiving you as hurting yourself, like I see you hurting
Mm-hmm.
and I have compassion for you, those words that you're saying to me don't really hurt because I'm not taking them personally because I know it's not about me. I recognize that you're hurting. And so I have sympathy and love for you, right? And compassion for you, not anger. And so, yeah, from there, I want to hear your thoughts around that phrase of make me feel, or you made me feel, or do you agree with what I'm saying? Or do you have, like, I would love for you to push back if you have examples coming to mind of like, well, this is a situation where somebody can make somebody feel something, because I have not found one yet. I haven't found a scenario where I'm convinced that somebody made somebody feel something, with the
Right.
exception of children, right? Small children who are developing in their minds, they don't have this understanding. They don't even have the separation necessarily of, oh, they're having their own experience and I'm having my own experience. Like cognitively, they're not capable. But I'm saying as a fully functioning adult with the ability to choose how they perceive their reality, like, do you agree with that statement, or do you have pushback?
Yeah, I do agree with you. I don't really have much pushback for it because I agree. Like, if people could make people feel certain things, it would be very cut and dry, like black and white. Like, okay, saying this word makes person feel blank emotion. Like, it doesn't work like that. I feel like I experience this very often because almost everyone who knows me describes me as someone who doesn't get bothered by things. And I resonate with that because I don't really react to things the way that a lot of people do. I witness people get really mad and heated over things that just like don't really bother me. So, and it's because of my perception. Like, I guess I just don't put as much weight into things like that, like words. So, of course, there's some things that could upset me. I'm not saying I'm like, I can't get upset, but I really do agree that it's just it's how you take it. It's not so cut and dry. Like, yeah, I don't believe that a person can make another person feel an emotion. A person can do an action that can bring up a feeling within you, but that's it's not them. Like, to take it to the most extreme. I saw a tweet the other day, and it was saying something like, what did they say? They said something like, people love to call out the the behavior, but not the action that caused it.
Hmm.
Saying like in an argument, you get you following what I'm
I
saying?
do.
Like, yeah. So I don't agree with that tweet because like they didn't cause you to feel this way. Like, you are responding to whatever this person did, and and you're entitled to feel that way. That, like, you can. That's good. You can feel that way, but they didn't do it. Like, it's your perception of what happened. To take it to like the most extreme level, like, this might sound like crazy or dumb, I don't really know, but like, this is what I thought of, is if your partner cheats on you. I think
Hmm.
a lot of people would view that as like, up there with the worst possible thing someone can do to you. And it makes sense to be upset about that, of course. Like, I think most people would have an upset reaction, but maybe someone out there would get cheated on and they would view it as, wow, I'm really glad that you exposed to me early on in this relationship. I mean, not early on, but you exposed to me that you are capable of cheating on me. And now I don't have to waste any more of my time with you. Like, you have shown me that you're not the person for me. That someone could perceive it that way. So, and that's like a super, extreme level. It can, it doesn't have to be something that big, but I really do believe that it's all up to our own perception. Um, the only thing that I wouldn't say it's like pushback, but I don't know how to like word this part, but I do think though there should be some accountability though for our words. So, like,
Absolutely.
for example, in a relationship, say your partner just out of nowhere starts calling you like a slur or something, like something that they know triggers you, and they're being very hurtful and mean about it. It makes sense to have an emotional response to that, and there has to be some accountability of like, okay, like, you're doing this like almost maliciously, you know, and of course you could just not be bothered by it, but I don't know, like, what do you think about that part? Like, I feel like there should be a conversation within the relationship of like, you know accountability with words. I don't know. I feel like I'm not wording
No,
this in the
no,
way I
I
need.
hear you. I hear you. I hear you perfectly. And yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not suggesting that because you are in control of how you perceive your reality, that there are no consequences for other
Hmm.
people's actions and that there shouldn't be accountability, and that because the same way that you're responsible for how you perceive your reality, they're responsible for how they communicate and what
Hmm.
they do and their actions and their choices and their responses to things. And so there should definitely be there's that should. As soon as I said it, I was like, ugh. There I think it would be ideal in all relationships for there to be personal accountability for the things we say and do and the impact that it has on our loved ones and even those that we don't love, on everyone around us. but they're having their own responsibility and accountability for what they've done is in no way connected to or an excuse to respond in a way that is out of alignment for yourself, right? So
Hmm.
I going back to that meme of like people love to call out the behavior but not the thing that led to that. Well, they both should be called out, but they're both
Hmm.
completely separate conversations.
Right.
Like that's where a lot of times in conflict people get really like twisted around and turned upside down because you start chasing these threads of, well, you said this, yeah, but that's because you said this, okay, but that was because 3 weeks ago you did this, yeah, but 2 years ago you did this, and now we're not even talking about the thing anymore. We're not
Right.
even having a conversation about the conflict that we're trying to resolve. And so they all need to be talked about, yes, but not one doesn't justify another. Each one individually is its own thing, and we need to apply these tools and these concepts to each individual thing, and that will help flesh out what was ideal, what wasn't ideal. Not necessarily right or wrong or good or bad. Those are judgments, and we don't need to put those
Hmm.
on there. But if we're striving for ideal and this wasn't ideal, let's talk about how we make it ideal for both of us. Let's talk about both of our ideal, right? We have a shared ideal, hopefully, or a compromise ideal. And so let's make sure that that's what we're focusing on in conversations, not blame or hurt. And that's what that meme sounds like to me
Oh
is
yeah.
blame.
Hmm.
Oh, well, yeah, I did this, but that's because of this. So now it's on you. I'm not responsible for my actions anymore. And that's a facade. That's not true. It's an illusion that you're creating with your language and blame, which is why there's no space for blame, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I think that's good there on that one. I don't know that I
Hmm.
have more necessarily to talk on that, but that's a great one to bring up. Do you have more on that?
No, yeah, I don't have anything else. Like you said, it's I think blame is what causes those type of things to spiral out of control, and like you get hurt. Okay, well now I need to hurt you back, and it's like you're not even like you said, you're not even talking about the same thing anymore. So yeah, I think we're good there. I agree.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and that pattern ultimately comes from a lack of safety and like projecting your hurt onto someone else because it doesn't feel safe to say that there was hurt or that you're feeling
Hmm.
hurt, right? And so that's a really common pattern because most people don't feel very safe in their most intimate relationships. There's a lot of people
Hmm.
that that's not their safest place, which is sad because it should be. There should. Back to people cheating on each other. Yeah, I really liked that analogy because again, yes, someone is doing something and they need to be held accountable for their actions.
Hmm.
And if they won't hold themselves accountable, that's okay. You can't make them be accountable for something, but you can make decisions on how you spend your time, who you're in relationship with, and those types of things. You can distance yourself from a person if there's not accountability being taken and like ultimately one the way that I look at cheating is if you're in relationship, if the purpose of your relationship is to serve each other's highest good, that might not mean that you're together forever, right? If I'm wanting to be with a woman because I love her and I want her to, you know, achieve as much as she can, grow and be the best, version of herself and the most fulfilled, version of herself that she can be, that might mean that somewhere along the line in that relationship, we will have either outgrown each other or I'm not able to provide for her all of the things that she needs the way that I was able to before when she was a different version of herself. And that's where we get into the conversation of like every one of us is a different version of ourselves every changing moment. I'm a new version of me because I've experienced more, I've had more thoughts, I've had more, whatever. And so I'm constantly evolving. And so ideally in a romantic committed relationship, you will be growing together and evolving together in the same direction, but that's not always the case. People grow at different rates, at different speeds, and we're all at different places in our journey, on our path of walking whatever this is that we're walking here. And so there's no guarantee that you and that person will be together forever. And so, looking at cheating, if someone makes that choice, ultimately someone's cheating because their needs aren't being met.
Hmm.
That's ultimately is at the root of cheating, a need or a desire. But either way, I mean, I think those two things are pretty akin.
Yeah.
If we have desires that are ultimately not met, it can feel very, very similar to a need not being met. And so, yeah, modifying it to needs and desires. But one of those two things isn't being met. And that's why that person is choosing to go outside of the relationship to get that need or desire fulfilled. And so, if you recognize it in that light and you don't take it personal and you don't make it about you, then you're able to perceive the situation as, oh, this person was doing what they needed to do to have their needs or desires fulfilled, which is within their domain. And if it wasn't happening in this relationship, you can either dissect that and be curious, what's going on, why wasn't that able to be fulfilled here, what aren't you getting here that you needed to get elsewhere.
Hmm.
Maybe not even a conversation with them, but with yourself. Start being objective. Of course, it's gonna hurt, right?
Yeah.
If you have a commitment with somebody and you've committed to not doing that and then they do that, then certainly there will be hurt. But back to the choice here, the choice of perception. You can choose to perceive it in the light of, well, they were getting their needs met, and there's no shame in getting your needs met. However, the way that it was done was undesirable for me and was hurtful. And that's something that I have an issue with. That's something that I need to make sure that you understand. And then from there, you can make decisions on what happens from there. Um, I have worked with clients who have had infidelity in their relationship.
Hmm.
I have seen that it is possible for people to work through those things if they desire to. Infidelity is not a relationship ender, but if you don't identify the root of why that person made that choice to go outside of the relationship for that need or desire to be fulfilled, that will end your relationship over time.
Hmm.
And so, and there's nothing wrong with ending a relationship when a boundary like that has been violated, right? That's understandable, but it doesn't have to be that way. And again, it's a choice of how you perceive it. You did this to me. You don't respect me, 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 me. You can make it all about you. You can. Chances are it wasn't about you. It was about them, and they
Hmm.
needed, again, their needs or desires fulfilled, and they weren't able to get that with you, which can't blame, like, that's where the blame thing doesn't make any sense, because it takes two people to create an environment, two people to create a relationship dynamic. And if that relationship dynamic led to them feeling like they needed to seek their needs and desires elsewhere, then you're equally, maybe not equally, but you're contributing, you're co-creating that dynamic that led to them needing to go elsewhere. And so to blame them for it, I think, is misguided and ultimately a way to like shield yourself from having to be honest about how you also contributed to this and are somewhat responsible for what happened. It's much easier to make them a villain, make them a terrible person in your mind, perceive them as harming you and doing something terrible to you, and you're just this victim of this situation, when very rarely is that the case.
Yeah, that's it's a tough, definitely a tough topic because like the emotions there are so like it's a tough one. Like I agree that yeah, it is up to their perception, and there might be something like that they're doing that contributes to it too. I guess I'm trying to just like put myself in those shoes. Like I like for me, I don't think I could. I don't think I could see myself staying with someone who cheats on me because I even though I shouldn't, I probably would take it personally, and it would be hard to like look at the person the same, knowing that they like violated your trust like that. But I definitely can, it happens like where couples do stay together, like they can. I think the thing about it is that if the person who cheated never voiced those things that they're needing and weren't being fulfilled, You know, like that's where I think it would be
Mm.
really hard to like, you know, get over it and move on, because it's like if they're making it very clear like, hey, my needs are not being met, and the person does nothing about it, and then they go out, you know, and cheat. I'm not saying even it's certainly never justified in my opinion. It's not like, you know, justified, but at least the signs were there, you know. Whereas I do think that sometimes people don't even voice, because they're afraid of the conflict. They don't voice that their needs aren't being met, so they just go get it somewhere else. I think that'd be a really hard pill to swallow, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great subject to bring up. So you're saying, what if they never voiced that their needs weren't being met? I wonder how much more likely it is that they tried to voice that their needs weren't met and the other person didn't hear them.
yeah, I mean that could
I
definitely
think it's
happen too.
more likely that they've in many situations there are attempts to bring forward issues, um, a dissatisfaction with something in the relationship. And if the other person doesn't truly hear them, they're not available or they're not trying to hear them, um, I think that it's more likely that it's not about them not communicating and it's about it not being received.
Hmm.
Maybe they're not understanding the signals or the communications. I mean, it's certainly likely and realistic to believe that it's not clear and direct communication. I'm not happy with this thing, and I'm going to go and do this now. Sure, I'm with you there. It's probably not communicated like that.
Hmm.
That would be like approaching conflict head on, like a freaking ram, a mountain ram who
Hmm.
is just like, I'm gonna butt my head into this thing. Let's go. We're gonna move through this conflict. That's not common. That's not a common way to bring up, especially something as intimate as a sex life,
Yeah.
and something like, you know, not feeling fulfilled in that sex life, because there's a very high likelihood the other person is going to take that personally.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm not satisfying you. I'm not good enough for you. Da da da. And so to approach it like that, I think would be very rare. I think more likely the person would have more subtly mentioned things here and there about either wanting things to be different or asking for things, um, to shift. But again, not probably not very clearly, not directly.
Hmm.
And so this is where ultimately applying these concepts and these tools that we teach will help people really hear each other before it gets to that point. Before someone feels like they need to step out of the relationship to go and get this need met, they can have real conversations. They can open a container. They can reflect to each other and make sure that they're really hearing what the other person is trying to say. You can ask questions. You can be curious, right? But that also requires presence. That requires intentionality, and um, yeah, that's hard to muster sometimes, especially. I don't know. I can't help but always bring up our society and people working 40 plus hours a week, commuting another, 30, 45 minutes a day, some people more. In LA, it was an hour each way.
Hmm.
So, I mean, all of those hours that you spend, and then you've got kids potentially, social life, and trying to manage a relationship, all of those things, each thing takes work. And if you're putting all of your energy, your best hours of every day during the best days of the week to work, how much is left over to give to these other relationships? And what are you prioritizing ultimately? And
Right.
so it's understandable that there's not a lot of energy left over to really sit down and hear your partner every time they have something to say. You're tired, you're distracted, you're wanting to be distracted because of like stress from work and just want to watch TV or I just want to decompress, and then you've got these people, these other connections that are trying to tap you for something. Like, it makes sense. There's plenty of empathy for why people aren't as present or intentional about each one of those relationships. You only have so much energy that you can give to things. But that doesn't negate the truth of the matter, that is happening, and that people are trying to communicate constantly. We're always communicating. Everything is communication.
Mm.
Um, and so whether it's body language, whether it's, the things that they aren't saying, but they are saying, maybe not in words, but they're saying it. So um, I think it's more likely that it had been communicated, just not received.
Yeah, I think that probably happens a lot. That like the signs are there. It's just kind of whether the person either picks up on them or even wants to try to pick up on them. Because, like you said, people
Mhm.
have so many other things going on in their life too that it's like after a long day they might not even be available to notice those things that are going on. So yeah,
Yeah, and as always, there's no shame or guilt, or like no one's wrong for their experience and going through it. Hopefully everyone's doing the best that they can. Um, and that's where, again, these tools and concepts, don't take it personally. You're not bad, you're not wrong. Pull yourself out of it, make it not about you, and then look at the things that we're talking about here, and hopefully it'll make it easier to really receive these truths, instead of, yeah, maybe rejecting them because of how they feel to hear.
yeah, I agree.
I think it was a really good conversation, and so I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, of course. I look forward to the next one.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.